afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. Super excited about this topic. I'm ready to see a fight, ready to see marketing and sales duke it out. Hope you guys are too. My name is Gina. I'm the Partner Success Manager here at Rev Genius. Today we are joined by three incredible people, David, Scott, and George, to talk about Attribution Showdown, marketing ops versus sales ops. Be sure to type in your questions in the chat. We do currently have a poll out there. We need some new shows that are binge worthy. So make sure you're dropping those in the chat and your questions for our amazing panel this afternoon in the Q&A. So with all of that being said, I'm going to turn it over to David Nelson to introduce our panels. Hope you guys enjoy.
Thanks so much, Gina. Thanks for having me. And first of all, let me just say I'm a huge fan of what you guys have created here at Rev Genius. I love how everyone comes together to learn from one another. And hopefully today we can contribute a little bit back. My name is Dave Nelson. I'm the CEO of Traction Complete, where we believe that data can be this incredible instruction set for businesses if it's done properly. And so we've been on this mission to help really improve the lives of revenue operations and go-to-market folks by creating software that helps across the full data lifecycle, from cleanup, matching, and orchestration, all the way down to sales territories and enablement. And this topic is very near and dear to my heart, both from wanting to know the detail and who should get credit, but also from creating software that should help companies as well. So I am fortunate to learn from not one, but two experts in this space today. George Samaras, who's the Director of Marketing Operations, and Scott Olio, who is the newly promoted Director of Business Analytics and Insights at both from Coveo. So George and Scott, thanks so much for joining. And Scott, congrats on the new promotion.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Do you guys mind telling us a little bit more about yourselves?
Sure. George, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure thing. And congrats, Scott, on the promotion. A little bit about myself. I've been working in marketing operations for over a decade now. My background comes from supporting Oracle's Eloqua marketing automation platform. I worked in a few different roles for Oracle, starting off in support and moving eventually up to technical account management. Decided to go client side at Ceridian for a few years, where I led campaign operations there before joining Coveo about just over 4 years ago, where I lead the marketing operations team. During that time, just been building some really cool things, managing and implementing and deploying a bunch of MarTech tools I'm happy to chat more about. Scott, I'll pass it off to you.
Great. Thanks, George. I've been at Coveo for 7.5 years. I recently changed from our BI team over to sales operations to lead up that function. I've moved quite recently into this role, but I have had a lot of time as an analyst for our sales ops team for about 3 years. At Coveo, I've had numerous different roles, from business development to marketing. And in my approach in sales ops, I try to be empathetic towards my past functions and the collaborators who I've worked with at this company for several years. And I try to avoid some of the friction that I've experienced over the past 7 years. Great.
Nice. Well, guys, thank you very much for joining. And today's topic is a spicy one. And attribution's hard, right? We've all lived through it. We know as soon as a deal closes, everybody wants to know, where did the deal come from? Who deserves the credit? And it's hard because we've all been there in situations where a young, hungry business development rep has spent weeks going through a cycle to try and get someone on the line, didn't get anything back, no contact. But then a couple months later, that company comes in inbound. And so then the question arises, should it be attributed to that rep who went in outbound and found them, or from the most recent marketing material that may have gotten sent out to them? So let's dive in. And maybe if you guys could help, we'll start from the beginning. What are the common approaches that you guys would take for marketing attribution, or that others may on the call?
Scott, I'll start this one off if that's okay. All right, cool. So we'll kind of do a bit of segue. I'll talk a little bit more on the marketing focus, and then Scott, I think you can broaden it up to the sales focus. So marketing attribution, we talk a lot about. I mean, I think it's been common lingo for a lot of marketing and marketing ops folks. The different types of attribution models. You have first touch attribution, last touch, multi-touch, and things like that. So I'll talk a little bit about them and, my experience with them both here at Coveo and in previous roles. So first touch attribution, I'll kind of split it there, but the first touch really comes from either, like, to your point, David, in the example you just gave, where it's like, who's the first touch that put the person in the database. Sometimes people measure first touch as the first touch before the opportunity was created. There's a bit of that temporal effect, although those 2 points in time I mentioned can be quite far off from each other depending on the customer journey. There's the last touch attribution, which is kind of covers what I just mentioned. More commonly, when it's used in marketing lingo, it's the last touch before a purchase is made. I'm not really a big fan of that. Of the 3 I just mentioned, it's my least favorite, just because a lot of the times there's multiple touches, and usually the last touch is not that relevant for getting someone to sign on paper. But it depends if you're a B2B or B2C company. B2C, it might be a little bit different, but speaking in the context of B2B, I'm not a big fan of it. And then there's my first,
you could game that too, because if you already had this op that was in the last stage, and then Mark like, well, if we just send another marketing message or some campaign source, we're going to get all the credit.
That last, a little ad or DM or email or something. So, but that's my point. I'll go a bit on a tangent here, but like my experience using that previously, you'd see like an arbitrary PDF get attribution for the deal because it just happened to be something that was consumed like a day or 2 before the deal was marked as closed won. So that's why I'm not a big fan of it. But the next one, which is my personal favorite, and we'll do quite a bit of talking about this today, is multi-touch attribution. And that's the one that you hear a lot about. And that's the one that's really hard to do because historically in marketing ops, and like I said, I've been in the space for over a decade, the first touch was kind of where it was always at. And I've seen it kind of evolve as the technologies and tracking have improved over time to this more multi-touch model. In the past few years, that's what's being discussed a lot about in the industry. And that really involves just looking at the touches along the customer journey and really kind of understanding that customer journey. And there's different ways. The good thing with multi-touch, what I love about it, is it's like a sandbox. It's so broad. You can kind of put it into different buckets, which I'll talk about a little bit later today, but you really can measure it different ways and slice and dice that entire customer journey in a way that's relevant to your organization.
Great.
Scott, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, I'll jump in and add to that. We also look at attribution by team. So at Coveo, and basically we've heard of 3 different models. So there's single source attribution, which is basically there's one team that gets recognized for bringing in the deal. Here, they're the primary source influencing the conversion or the opportunity creation. And since there's only one team that gets credit, there's a lot of friction. This is where we really see, or in the past, we saw sales against marketing, and both teams were at each other's throats just a little bit. But then more recently, we looked at a different way of doing things, which was 2 distinct attribution pies. So here there's the marketing pie, where marketing looks at whether it contributes to a deal, marketing versus non-marketing. And then there's a secondary pie where all the various sales teams, so we have business development, alliances, CSMs even, look at that single pie for the sales team, and they basically see whether they're contributing and how much they're contributing throughout the journey there. What's good about this model is marketing feeds sales, so there's less contention there, but still within those teams, there could be a little bit of contention. And then lastly, there's a custom model. So this is the other thing that we do. So you tailor attribution for each team. This is more what we've done in the last year. So here, every different team has a way of tracking how they contribute to deals. And what we do is we account for an overlap so that even if each team is touching a deal twice, let's say, we take that into account and we still hit our company targets, even if each individual team does hit their targets as well. I could give some examples. So business development, we look at whether they're a member of the opportunity team. Marketing, we look at lead source. CSMs, we look at if they pass through a stage gate. Each team has their own respective way of tracking, and then you account for overlap where two teams could be part of the same deal. This is where you have the least friction amongst teams. You just need to be careful that not everyone's achieving their goals, but the company isn't as a whole.
That's interesting. So when you dive into that and you're looking at, okay, well, business development's reaching out to them, and this makes a ton of sense, by the way, in account-based marketing, because you're both supposed to be going after them together. But business development's going after the account, marketing is putting all sorts of campaigns around the account. When you're looking at targets and stuff for sales and marketing, do they both get attribution in those scenarios?
Yes. So their marketing basically is completely separate from sales. That's how we do it at Coveo. So marketing is looking at whether they're touching deals or not touching deals. And in almost every case, marketing is feeding teams like business development. On the other end, customer success deals usually are sourced solely from that team. They're speaking directly to the customers. Those are deals that marketing is not touching, but it's two separate pies that allow us to measure each independently, but there is crossover. So they are contributing to the same deal.
Interesting. Yeah, fascinating. Okay. That's great. And so in that case, what are the kind of pros and cons for each of those scenarios?
George, do you want to kick this one off, or should I just jump into it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to chat a little bit about this. So, one of the things, I guess I'd say one of the big pros and cons that I kind of see with this is it's a bit of a linear, like, waterfall model. So you can, like Scott was just iterating, it's everything kind of follows almost like a sales journey, we'll say, for lack of a better word. Like, marketing starts with feeding the sales teams, but the BDs are not really encroaching on the AEs. Marketing's not really encroaching on the BDs. So for lack of a better term, we go after, I'd say, different parts of the pie. We have different targets, and so there's a lack of conflict. In a lot of organizations, what ends up happening is the metrics that a lot of companies are measured on from an attribution, the different teams, they fight over the same piece of the pie, and that's where you get the real conflict, because it's not just conflict, your usual sales and marketing conflict, but you have something that's tied to KPIs, to compensation, so on and so forth. So the pro of ours, and I would say, or the model that we're familiar with, and that Scott and I have been familiar with here at Coveo, is that we don't have that level of conflict. We're kind of marketing, and I'll speak as from a marketing lens, we're feeding the other teams, but we're not really getting too much conflict from them because of the way we're kind of sourcing the opportunities. And at the same time, there's clear, measurable, and objective KPIs for each team. It's not like they're vanity metrics, for lack of a better term. Like, they're hard metrics, like it's for marketing, for us, it's SQL pipeline sourced by marketing. That's a hard metric. But same with the BDs, it's meetings booked, AEs, obviously opportunities closed won. So these are hard metrics, they're not vanity metrics. So it removes the conflict but retains the legitimacy of pushing the pipeline.
So George, there's a couple questions there.
Sure.
When those scenarios, I think you said sales is measured, or BDs are measured on meetings booked, and marketing's measured on SQL sourced by marketing, right?
Yes.
So if it's an SQL sourced by marketing and then the BDR books the meeting, do they both get attribution there, or is it okay? Okay.
Scott and I are both grinning because it's a very common thing when we go through our weekly opportunity reviews. But initially, like, for a lot of people listening in, it might not sound intuitive. And like, I totally get it too, because at the same time, like, we've had a few newer SDRs or BDRs on our team. They'll be like, hey, you changed my opportunity to marketing source. Like, am I going to be impacted by this, right? But then we explain to them, like, hey, no, you're responsible for either meeting booked if you're a BDR. For context, at Coveo, we have our business development function split into SDRs and BDRs with different KPIs. BDRs more handling inbound and SDRs outbound. But either way, that marketing attribution that we're doing, where we're adjusting the source based off of that multi-touch view we have, doesn't conflict on anything. Like, I can accurately give marketing credit while not interfering whatsoever with anyone on the business development team, and that friction gets reduced. It's almost like, because people are, typically apprehensive to because they're used to it. Most other organizations measure that way, and so they're like, "Hey, you're taking credit from me. That's not cool. It's going to affect my comp." But for the newer people that are in the organization, once we explain that to them, it works a lot better and it reduces a ton of friction.
I'll just add a little piece here. We only would change a lead source if it's trackable. We look back at the history of what that lead or contact that converted into the opportunity did, and we could see the history of that first touch point. We would only make an adjustment, and this is, I guess, needed at a company, an agreement between operations teams that we do our best to do what's right, and we do not make adjustments that cannot be backed up. So we'll only make a change to a lead source or some other form of adjustment if there's evidence for that change and that we have that history very clear within the system. At the same time, I'll just add to what George said. What is kind of nice is the focus shifts. People stop focusing on whether they're getting credit or not, and instead they focus on building pipeline. That's what's most important, or hopefully booking and closing and winning those deals. But each team has their KPIs. We attribute it to them based on their activities or based on lead source, and everyone is focused on doing what they're supposed to do for the business.
That's right, Scott. And I'll add to that the multi-touch piece, which I will be delving into on this webinar, is where we kind of get that marketing attribution. We'll talk a lot more about that in a bit.
Yeah, that's incredible. So one of the things that we've seen in the past is where business development reps are both receiving inbound leads and trying to go outbound. We're trying to promote that they're putting a lot of effort into outbound. And so some companies are compensating BDRs for closed won deals that they source from outbound. But then all of a sudden that attribution fight or argument comes up. Well, if there was an inbound lead from a great company, but we didn't get in touch with them, but we went outbound to somebody similar and that one got in touch, then whose is it? So I like what you're saying, Scott, about the evidence in the system and being able to use that to your benefit. And yet it's still hard, right? It's still hard because some partner recommended you behind the scenes and, you don't find that out till later. So I think you can only do so much. But yeah, please carry on. I love hearing what you guys are doing. I love hearing about how it's improved as well. Any metric, I mean, that might be hard, but any metrics you guys have seen on the improvement of the teams, or has it been more kind of soft retention and happier engagement from the teams?
So I could add there, it's synergy. So both teams are performing better if we're looking at business development and marketing. What's interesting is both are achieving their goals and then some. We've had, I believe it's 3 or 4 quarters of back-to-back growth in our pipeline development where we're doing quite well, and we implemented these changes about a year ago. We constantly need to go back and ensure that the relationship between the teams are positive, but this has greatly helped, and it removes friction not only in just what we're doing here, credit, but also day to day. I find the collaboration between marketing and sales, or at least marketing and business development, has been much more positive. There's an openness to doing work that isn't necessarily needed from teams. So they'll go to each other for advice, things like that about messaging. It's a much more overall positive relationship, and the results to date have been better than before. So that's how we're measuring success today.
I'll add to that on Scott's point too. On the marketing side of the house, there's less of a defensive or apprehensive approach now. And we're really using now this data to figure out what's working and what's not, instead of like kind of trying to hit that metric or like hit that KPI and, get my attribution. Now it's more, okay, we have this, but now I want to see what's working better so that when my targets go up next quarter, I'm prepared. I know what's going to work. I know what's not going to work. And I can kind of be laser focused on my campaigns and channels that are going to work.
Yeah, amazing. It's interesting when you try to break down all of the touches, it seems like there can be lots of different influencers, right? How do you then take that to say, BD touched it this many times, there were 7 different marketing campaigns affiliated with it. How do you try and really distill down what were the big contributors that got them over the line to those decisions?
Scott, you want me to take this, or you want to take a stab at it?
I'll go very high level. I think when looking at contributions, like from a technical perspective, we look at campaign responses, not necessarily what we sent and didn't really get engagement with. And same with activities. Like, we can make calls and send emails, but if we don't get replies or connects, those are kind of just noise, in our opinion. Sometimes we have to take that with a grain of salt. Someone receives an email, they forward it to a colleague. That being said, it's really outcomes that we're looking for along the way that are positive along that journey that we're really clearly measuring. And that makes it at least a little easier to distill what is important within that journey. Also on the marketing side, and George, I think you could add a little bit more layer to this. There's certain activities we do scoring. So certain key activities, if someone submits a contact us request on our website, that's a much more critical key indicator of interest coming from the marketing team. It's a submission through our site. Someone says they want to speak to sales. It's a clear example of two pies where it'll pass to a business development person who will work it. But at the same time, we know that that's a good activity that led to the outcomes that we're looking for. Versus if someone looks at content syndication, while it might be something helpful, it's not usually an indicator that it's going to convert. It could be something early, but a lot more work needs to go into it.
I'll add to what Scott says. So that's like on the marketing side, it's completely true. We actually even on our opportunities, when we add the contact roles and the campaign responses come with them, we actually bring over the last campaign response that created or before the opportunity was created. And to Scott's point, we'll also bring in the scoring value. So if in this case, like at Coveo, we have different tiers to our MQLs. We have our MQL HOTS, which are our hand raises, our meetings, our demos, and then we have MQLs 1, 2, and 3, depending on, we'll call it the heat of the MQL activity. And because of that, we're able to evaluate at the opportunity level, okay, not only what campaigns are coming up most often, but what channels are coming up most often and what types of MQLs. And, when we're doing some of our MQL analysis, we're noticing like, hey, our MQL HOTS, which are demos or contact us requests and things like that, are 14x more likely to convert to an opportunity versus our standard MQL, which is kind of logical, but we're able to quantify that now using our data within our CRM. So we see all this, we're able to report on it, and we're able to see what's working and what's not. The great thing about it is we're also able to find like nuggets of information where we're like, oh, like we noticed this campaign in particular, this webinar, when I'm speaking from actual fact, a webinar, we kind of, I wouldn't say we glossed over, but it was just like, hey, it's a webinar. But this webinar in particular, it's been sourcing 37 opportunities and going, so it's going pretty strong. And it was pretty impressive to see that. And that's something without this multi-touch reporting system that we had, we wouldn't have picked up on, at least not for a while. So.
Believe it. Yeah. Fascinating. Now, earlier you were saying that, there's the different options, and that when you're really just looking at who sourced it as a kind of black or white, it was much simpler, but didn't tell the full story. How do you get started in this multi-touch, in this kind of broader approach that seems to be the better way to reduce kind of friction, but perhaps more work?
I'll probably take this one. So I'll talk a little bit about the multi-touch because I'll speak more on the marketing side, because I think of the big teams like marketing and sales, I think it's a little harder to track it within marketing. I'll do a little touch on sales right now. So like business development, most of their activities are tracked on the lead or contact level. When you have a tool like Outreach or Gong, they're writing activities to Salesforce automatically. And it's been like that for a long time. So there's no concern there. Marketers, we're familiar with the campaign record, and I'll kind of start it here, but having a strong campaign structure is key. I'll say this, in order to get where we're at, like where we got it, we didn't do this overnight or within a few months or even a year. This is several years of work. Like I said, I've been at Coveo now for over 4 years, working with Scott directly the entire time. It's been years of reiterating, a bit of failing, and then ultimately finding success at where we're at right now. But it starts with good infrastructure. So we have a good campaign structure. My team really drives home the importance of capturing all our responses at the campaign member level. We care about responses, we care about conversions, and that needs to be reliable and bulletproof within our sales force. From there, you need to have a good taxonomy. Most B2B companies don't sell one solution or single solution to one business. Most have different types of products. At Coveo, we have, I'll say two to three lines of business. We're in the middle of shifting, but like we have two big lines of business. Even Ceridian, my last company, we had 4 large lines of business. And so having the ability to report on the response, the LOB it's for, and then be able to match that to your opportunities LOB is important. That comes from a strong taxonomy structure, which that took us along. I remember, I think Scott was one of the first projects we worked on when I joined 4 years ago. Was we spent like the first 6 months standing up a proper taxonomy with all these different use cases. From there, and I'll jump a little bit, deeper into it, but you really have to have some strong scoring, because what we noticed was we had this cool taxonomy, and we're like, okay, well, Coveo, we have our 2 biggest LOBs are e-commerce and service. And so we noticed some people would be consuming e-commerce content, but at the same time consuming service content. And you're like, well, which one are they? Especially when it's like a CIO level, it might be a little vague to figure out which LOB they're related to. And so we developed an internal scoring system within Marketo to see what lines of businesses they're engaging with. And then from there, figure out what their top LOB is. And from there, you'll be able to then add them, match them to their respective opportunities. You have a more accurate picture of what the person's interested in, especially for some of those more vague titles where it could be senior enough where they could be involved in multiple lines of business. And so it's super important to have that. I'll drive home as a marketing ops person, having the campaign membership available is key. You need to track all your campaign responses. Anything that's not tracked, if you have something that's like non-traditional, we'll say like, using direct mail, which is something that's technically an offline conversion, make sure you get that into your system. All these online and offline conversions should be in your CRM. Otherwise, this will never work properly. Scott, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing on the taxonomy. I think it's like an important addition, which is we have this across all our core objects. So George mentioned campaigns, but we also have it on leads, contacts, and opportunities. So we're tracking that taxonomy and that engagement across these objects throughout the buyer's journey. And even our business development team and sales teams are oriented towards a line of business, and they work leads. Let's say a commerce SDR will work commerce leads only. If they're service leads, they'll route to someone else. This enables us to make kind of inferences based on the data that we're seeing. And since we're tracking everything, we have the infrastructure in place to infer a campaign response to an opportunity, since that journey is connected along the way. And I say infer, usually the lead starts off through a campaign response, they'll convert to a contact and end up on the contact roles of the opportunity. The journey is clear. And we measure everything along the way. So it's pretty robust, but that allows us to do this. The other thing that you just mentioned was making sure that things are tracked. It's the same thing on the sales side. I think we're used to this kind of sentence, but if it's not in Salesforce, it never happened. So anything business development wise, alliances, sales, depends on the day, but usually it needs to be tracked for attribution for our pipeline. That's how we do it. If a team doesn't put in the information, they won't necessarily get the credit unless they add the information retroactively, but they know that they have to do that. So far, we haven't had too many issues with cleanliness.
Nice.
Great.
Yeah. No, that's great. And actually, we got some engagement from the audience here. Someone's asked, how do you get both marketing and sales to buy into this new attribution model?
It's actually at the executive level. So luckily, we're not the largest company. We're about 750 people. And George reports to the CMO and I report to the CRO. Basically, in the past, we went directly to them and made sure that they were bought into any changes that we made. In addition, we tended to test the previous model while simultaneously trying to implement the new one. So we'd be able to go back to them with results about what the new model's impact would be so that they felt comfortable with making the change. Let's say on the marketing side. Yeah, well, we didn't want to overhaul anything without knowing the consequences of that action. So we did it carefully, but we did go and seek buy-in with evidence to these two stakeholders, and then they allowed us to go and propagate this throughout the organization.
I'll add to that too, like how we did it. Like I can give you from our own experience. We set up. So I went to my SVP and I asked him, I'm like, what would be the best way to sell this internally? Because you can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you're not bought in, it'll be dismissed. So we did a bit of an internal roadshow. So we literally kind of went from our business, the VPs of our sales units. We went to obviously our CMO, we went to the CRO, we went to the CTO and the CEO. They're both co-founders. So we shopped it around. We pretty much showed this to everyone, and we're like, hey, what do you think? This is how we're doing things today. We're trying to establish a better granularity and better tracking. And so we pretty much just roadshowed it internally, got buy-in, and then I'll add the second part was managing it downwards. So great, we managed it upwards. We had all the senior people buy it in, but at the end of the day, my CTO's KPIs are not related to marketing's, how many opportunities marketing has touched. So what we wanted to do was the people who are directly responsible for these KPIs, the pod leads from marketing, the campaign managers, we wanted to develop a KPI system, like a measurement system that they're familiar with. We didn't want to pretty much turn their world upside down and within a quarter. And so like today we're actually doing this is we have their existing KPIs. We're measuring it with the new multi-touch model, and we're still using the same measurement system. So a lot of people will use like first touch or multi-touch or how many touches total. We actually are still using pipeline influenced, but instead of looking at pipeline sourced, we're looking at pipeline across the journey. What does that mean? Their targets will be higher, but that's because they're touching more things, because we have that visibility now. We're not just looking at opportunities, touch points 0 to 90 days before an opportunity was created. I'm looking all the way up until that opportunity closes. But at the same time, we're still speaking the same language of dollars influenced. And that's the big thing to soften the blow and manage it downwards as well as upwards.
When you made that shift, how did you figure out what those new targets should be? Because it would have been pretty different from just going to from sourced to now influence. It would have been a much bigger number, like you said. But how did you figure out what a good goal should be? Once you've started and done it for a while, you have history and data, but how do you start?
Great question. So we did have historic data. So how we did it, I'll kind of explain you how we did it. So we took our numbers we had today from 2021 to today. And then what we did was we changed the lens to look at our historic attribution system. So right now, if we said, I'm going to make up some numbers here, let's say in Q1 of 2024, or we'll say Q1 of 2023, we'll go back a year. We'll say Q1 2023, we marketing sourced 50% of pipeline. But now with this multi-touch approach, we noticed actually we influenced about 80% of pipeline. You're right. That's a huge jump, 30%. That will scare any marketer. And that's what I mean about the managing downwards. Yeah. So what we did was we took the historic data and then we tied it to our chief business officer's KPIs that he has set out. So he'll have like marketing targets for the quarter, and we'll say, okay, well, if historically these previous quarters we influenced, 80% in Q1, 60% in Q2, 70% in Q3, we'll set the same targets quarter over quarter, split by LOB, but we're using it with the influence lens. And the great thing about having that strong campaign membership we've had, pretty much the first thing I introduced when I joined Coveo, we have this data retroactive to 2020. So I'm able to go pretty far back and see how well we've been doing this. So I was able to get an accurate lens. And it also allows us, like we explored some things too, like we know seasonality of our influence. Like for example, like our Q2s, it dips for some reason, which we're digging into, we discovered recently, but it was just an odd thing we noticed. But you find all these things. So, but going back to your question, that's how we kind of made that comparison. We used our historic data. We just didn't kind of throw something against the wall and saw what stick. We wanted to be fair to our marketers who are going to be driving a lot of this.
Okay.
Also, fair to the business. We don't want to set targets that are too easy and everyone just overachieves all of a sudden. We wanted to make sure that we're fair across. And I think that's the most important thing is we're going slowly, but we're testing along the way. And for any of these iterations that we've made to this model and way of doing things, we test it first, we evaluate whether it's worth implementing, and then we might tweak it a little bit prior to putting something in place and then setting targets that go with those tweaks that were made.
Amazing. Yeah, I love it. Guys, there's more engagement from the audience. And actually, George, if we can back up for a second, Mary Claire asks, can you please clarify what you mean by taxonomy again?
Sure. So taxonomy for us, I'm going to speak in, I'll speak a bit in CRM lingo, but marketing ops lingo as well. So in the CRM lingo, we basically have what's known as a use case. And that's basically what denotes our LOB. We have two ways to figure out our LOB. We have use cases. We have 23 of them, which sounds like a lot, but they roll up into, I believe it's 5 core solution categories. So that's what we mean from a taxonomy perspective. Previously, we were not doing that. We were just we had a campaign. I'd have to go and guess and stitch the data together. Extremely difficult to do. Now, on the flip side, we don't use this taxonomy just at the campaign level. Like if I put a webinar for our e-commerce LOB, it'll be tagged with that use case. But we also have it on our leads, our contacts, and our opportunities as well, and our campaigns. We put it everywhere. And then what I've built under the hood in Marketo is a scoring system so I can derive your primary use case and your primary solution category. And this is great for our binge consumers who binge consume a lot of content that might be from multiple lines of business. It also helps us distinguish people who might primarily consume content that's generic, high level, but we're not able to derive a primary use case. From there, we're able to marry that data that's on the lead, the contact, and the campaign to the opportunity, because we have the matching taxonomy on all four of those objects. The campaign, the lead, the contact, and the opportunity. So it's something that's a little within the scoring system too. For anyone who's joining from a Marketo perspective, it's not something you can build natively within Marketo to determine the top score. There's a special tool. Not being paid to plug it, but I'll plug it anyways. Flow Boost is the tool we use to score. A highly powerful tool you can add on, and it's something that you'll need to do this scoring if you're using Marketo. I see some chatter about some other marketing automation platforms. I think in Eloqua you can build something similar within Eloqua itself. I can't speak too much on the Pardot or HubSpot side. I haven't gone in the weeds to build a system like that in those platforms.
Nice. And I guess moving on, I want to start talking about operationalizing this. You've already started to talk about a little bit, and there was another question from the audience on what software are you using for this multi-touch? It sounds like you just mentioned one for scoring. Is there anything else that you're using? I've heard Salesforce. I've heard Marketo. Yeah. What else?
Scott and I are both grinning on this one because we've.
It's going to sound funny. A lot of testing in Google Sheets. So basically, we use this tool called G Connector. My favorite tool in existence. $300 lets you push Salesforce reports to Google Sheets and refresh them in real time. And we've used that to circumvent any gaps in our rules within Salesforce by pushing data there and then upserting it back into Salesforce. That usually is not a long-term solution, but it lets us do very rapid testing. So what we could basically do is write rules before building new fields in Salesforce. We see whether it gives us the results we're looking for any of this sort of associations through campaigns. And then we basically test and we look there. That being said, most of this is just straight out of Salesforce and Marketo. Salesforce campaigns, lead and contact objects. It's just more the taxonomy that was built there with I could add there's two major things. We have, to George's point, a use case and a solution category. And those are related to each other. And this lives across the 4 objects that we mentioned. And it even goes deeper into our products and things like that, but that's not related to this.
I'll add too, because I think I know where that question was coming from. There are some attribution tools out there. We've experimented with them. Unfortunately, we didn't find the success we were looking for. So what we're mentioning right now, everything we're describing, this is something we built in-house with just our marketing automation platform and our Salesforce instance.
Yeah,
that's huge. And oh, go ahead, Scott. Sorry.
I was just going to say, in the past, when we tried doing attribution tools, I think some of the issues were tailoring to our needs. It just really never worked. We tried, I think, a few times, and in every instance, we just couldn't really get something that we would receive buy-in for from stakeholders. We might have believed in the tool, but it was too difficult to tailor it and get people to actually agree with the information that was being surfaced. I'm sure there's tools out there that can do that properly, but we did run into those issues with pure attribution tools. It just wasn't tailored enough.
Nice. Now, I know, guys, this sounds like a ton of work, but George, I also know that you love to automate as much as possible. Once you've got this alignment from all the teams and everyone's bought in, have you been able to automate any of this? I know, aside from the stuff that you just said, campaigns and Salesforce automatically being tied to leads.
That's a good segue from the previous question, because where this all came from here at Coveo was we were experimenting with an attribution tool. We were not finding the success because, to Scott's point, we had difficulty adapting the tool to the way we measure things here at Coveo, like with the nuances of our lines of business. And then furthermore, we were noticing some accuracy issues, and our stakeholders weren't buying in because they were able to poke holes in the data. As an operations person, whether you're marketing, sales ops, or whichever role you might be, rev ops, it's really, there's no worse thing than losing credibility of your own data. And so that was the challenge that we had with the tool, and we had to come up with a solution as a workaround. So what we did in terms of, like, just going back to how we automated a lot of this. So we went back to the drawing board and we're like, okay, how could we do this in-house? And so we experimented initially. Go back a bit. We experimented initially with a custom object many years ago called the buying group custom object. It was one of those things. We developed something that was a little more high tech than where we're at the time, but it was really good. And I'm going to give full credit to our director of sales ops for developing it. But what we decided to do was, let's use a standard object that everyone in the org is familiar with from a selling and marketing perspective: the opportunity. Now, every marketing ops and sales ops person who's sitting here will know the biggest gripe with the opportunity from a reliability perspective is the contact role, at least for me. And I'll say, I think for a lot of people, the contact role, everyone I've spoken to, online and offline, it's always like, well, yeah, sellers will just kind of put in one or two people to kind of get the opportunity started.
Almost always just one, the first one that was associated when they convert a lead or create the op.
Exactly, and it brings in all their info, that person's information. It brings over their lead source. It brings over all their information, which is fine. That's how Salesforce is supposed to work. But we all know in B2B SaaS, there's not one person buying a tool. It's a team of people. And so, I kind of applied it. I put my marketing ops lens as a prospect. I'm like, if I were to go buy a marketing automation platform or an ABM platform tomorrow, like, would I be the only person doing? No, my CMO would be the one signing on the dotted line. My SVP would probably be doing a detailed review with me. I'd ultimately probably be the decision maker, but I'd have my team doing a lot of research. My team would be the ones being like, well, does it have this feature, this functionality, this capability? Can it integrate with X, Y, and Z? Yes or no? And from there, all of a sudden, you notice that buying group is not just me and my CMO. It's my 3 direct reports, my SVP, a lot of people we didn't see. So how we did that, we started looking at using the campaign responses, and using that taxonomy we've been mentioning over and over again, is we were able to match, if someone engaged with one of the pieces of our content, we were able to match if the use case from that content matched the use case on the opportunity. So we have traction complete. We have, so when a lead comes in, we match them to their account based off of Traction Complete's lead to account matching. And then from there, we look at that campaign response and we say, okay, hey, this campaign response was for commerce. Does this account have an opportunity open? Yes or no? If yes, okay. Do they have a commerce opportunity open? Yes. Okay. is this person on the opportunity already as a contact role? If they're a lead, they can't be. So, so then at that point you check, and then you realize, okay, well, this person's part of this account. They just engaged with a piece of commerce content while the opportunity for commerce is open. There's a high probability this person is part of the buying group. Given for our business at Coveo, people, will typically, when they're engaging with our content, it's intentful. They're coming to learn more about us. It's not by fluke or by accident. So, so what we end up doing is we have a flow that will automatically add them to the opportunity if they're a contact. If they're a lead, it converts them to a contact and then adds them to an opportunity. And what's great is all that campaign membership comes through. So now all of a sudden that opportunity under the related campaign records gets a lot beefier, and you're able to see more of that journey, which is really cool. From there, what we did with automation was we set up milestones, because like there's a lot of like some opportunities you'll see like 60 plus campaign responses because you got maybe 7 people there and they're pretty highly engaged. And so what we'll do is we set up milestones within the opportunity. And for people using Salesforce, if you're familiar, when you go look at a campaign in Lightning, I'm going to be speaking in Lightning speak here, but when you go look at a campaign, you see at the bottom that pie chart with all the different member the total number of members, and then it's divvied up by color based off the types of member statuses. We did something like that at the opportunity level. If you go into Coveo's Salesforce today and you pull up one of our opportunities, that's the first thing you'll see is that pie chart, but it's broken down by milestones we set up. So we set up milestones looking at 365 days to 180 days before the opportunity is created, 180 to 90, 90 to 0. Opportunity created, so 0 days to when it was sales accepted to sales qualified. Those are all date fields. And then from there, we're able to see all the touch points that occurred within these buckets we created. So we're able to see more of a journey. And then from there, I have some pretty cool, I'm able to see, hey, at 0 to 90 days across all our opportunities, this particular webinar is popping up quite a bit. That's interesting. I wonder why. So you kind of have that level of fidelity that only automation can do at scale. And obviously people can add people to contact roles and buying groups, and sellers still do. They're obviously invited to add as many people that legitimately make sense. But at the same time, we have automation running a redundancy to make sure we have that full picture.
I'll just add, it's not just the marketing campaigns. So when leads are converted to contacts and added to the opportunity, every related object gets ported over. So their activities as well. So you're not just supplementing the marketing journey, you're supplementing the entire journey by having that automation in place. Additionally, we are clear to denote who was added through this automation so that we could look back and see if there was a false positive. But anyone who's looking at the opportunity can see that journey. They could dive in, see what was automatically updated, and they could just go and modify the contact roles because maybe that person is very pertinent and they missed them because they only added the first person they spoke with. So they can supplement, they get all the information about the journey, and it helps both sales, marketing, and the business as a whole make better decisions.
Nice. Yeah, that's amazing. And actually relevant. So another question from the audience, Cal asked, for someone just getting started with multi-touch on the marketing side with multiple lines of business or personas, what's the best way to analyze the reports? And I feel like that's a great question because it seems like there's a lot more data that we're now talking about here, a lot more touches, milestones, etc.
It's an interesting one. Go ahead if you have a comment right away.
I'll take a stab at it. I would say it's a good question. I would say what you really need to reiterate is having the reliable taxonomy to see, to make sure that the touches are related. I'll dig a little bit about, some attribution tools we've used in the past where we didn't find success. We were able to link, see that multi-touch approach, link all those leads and contacts to the opportunity, but we weren't able to stand behind and say, hey, this person did something that was engaged directly to the opportunity. And that's where the taxonomy is a bit of that missing link, where we're able to match like what this person is doing, what they're primarily interested in based off their digital body language, and tie it to the opportunity that we have open. I can't speak because I haven't touched attribution tools now in a couple of years, but my experience with them is there's quite a bit there has to be quite a bit of development work to stitch it together, if it's even at all possible. We weren't able to find success with it, which is why we built it in-house. But so you get that multi-touch approach, but then you might see something in our instance. I'll use, for example, a director of knowledge management looking at something being related to or influencing an e-commerce opportunity, which in our world, we know that's impossible because they're two distinct LOBs. At this point, it's just noise. Or if it's, you set up ICPs and you're going after accounts, you might have different marketing pods going after different buying groups unrelated to each other at these large accounts. So that's really the challenge of when you're looking at it with multi-touch without that taxonomy in place. Now, I'll say this too, though. Taxonomy is not a prerequisite if you only have one line of business. If you're a smaller company where you sell one solution to one buying group and an account and that's it, taxonomy might not be relevant. But for most of us, most enterprises, most mid-market companies, there's multiple buying groups within an account. There's multiple offerings of a solution. So you need to be cognizant of that when taking that multi-touch lens on.
So I'll add a little bit of context for reporting specifically. You have a lot more options, but I don't think you lose much along the way with multi-touch, as long as you can associate that this was influenced by this team. That's how we tend to look at things, is we add different lenses for each group instead of looking at them as a whole. So as we mentioned before, we have a specific pie that's marketing versus non-marketing, and we determine whether or not opportunities were influenced by the marketing team or not influenced by the marketing team. And we do the same for each constituent group of sales. So business development, alliances, we look at them individually to see how they influenced opportunities and whether or not they were participants in it. And then what we do is we roll that information up to basically say which teams touched an opportunity throughout the journey and influenced it in their various ways. That's how we've done it. I don't know if that's the best approach, but it allows us to get what we're looking for, which is who contributed. Now, moving to this multi-touch model, we could also say how much they contributed, and we know when in the journey they were participants. It's a lot to look at, but at the same time, it lets you make so much better decisions that it's worth the effort, in my opinion.
Nice. Yeah, that's fantastic. George, I know you mentioned the milestones that you put in place. Any more specifics or examples that the audience can take away for setting things like that up in their own systems?
I would say the milestones, I'll be transparent. They're things that we kind of locked in just based off of like a general business agreement. The one thing I'll add, and it was Scott mentioned this a little earlier, is be careful of the touch points within the milestones. We'll notice things, certain conversions. So even though there's responses, some of them might not necessarily be influential the way you think it might be. For example, like we've noticed some challenges, content syndication is like a big one, where sometimes you'll see responses that necessarily you might not want to attribute. But because of that time effect, they could show up in that one of the more key milestones. On the flip side too, you also want to look at some responses that might, we'll say they're conversions, but not necessarily ones that would influence like accelerate pipeline. A big one I use is we'll say gifting. Gifting is good, I think, to get meetings and things like that. But like sometimes we'll just do gifting because, hey, this person's upcoming on a milestone, or like, maybe they met us at an event and, got free AirPods or something like that. So we have gifting like that. You got to be careful with some of those touch points because they could falsely create noise. And they could falsely inflate some of your milestones and for you thinking that some channels are working better than they actually are. So take it like, it's not like you can kind of just set up the system and then you just look at a dashboard and it's good to go. You do need to periodically dig into the data. Go ahead, Scott.
So date stamps everywhere. You got to make sure that you have the dates correct of when the person was added to the campaign and when they responded. And you need to also compare that to when the opportunity was created. You want to make sure that you're saying the influence, let's say, of the creation of an opportunity. You want to make sure the response was prior to the ops create date. So having that ability to add date stamps throughout the journey on every key critical moment that's taking place makes it way, way easier to support what you're doing and this infrastructure. If you don't add date stamps on the response time or the opportunity creation date or the person associated with the opportunity, you may miss out on key critical moments and more false positives.
I'll add to that, Scott, on the marketing lens. The date stamps usually are automated within the system. Like, whenever a response occurs, it happens pretty much in real time. But I will add one thing: offline responses to be cognizant of, because one thing a small hiccup, an interesting one we noticed was sometimes we'd find opportunities were created at events before we got the post-event list. And so we might have had a really good engagement with a marketer there. The marketer immediately slacks the seller creates an opportunity, and then the event response comes in maybe a week after because we got the list after the event. So the date stamps, to Scott's point, like, they're automated, they could be reliable. You still need to audit them though periodically, especially for the offline engagements where you don't have that level of automation. It's really at the mercy of when you load that list in. So.
Oh, that's such a good point. Yeah. Any other things that are often overlooked or undervalued when we're looking at multi-touch?
George, do you want to go for it?
Sure. I would say so. I mean, for me, like, thinking about it, I won't touch too much on taxonomy. That's the first one I'll say, but I think I've said enough today. I would say really here is the data integrity. I cannot stress enough, for me, the big thing of how we went down this we got really intense into this attribution rabbit hole was we had tools where we lost credibility because the data integrity was not there. And that's, like, once again, I'll just reiterate, that's the worst feeling as an ops person, because you're the caretaker of the data, you're the steward of the data. So if your data is not reliable, you don't have that integrity, it's pretty much a loss to your core function. So I would say that's super important to have that data integrity when you're doing this up. You need to have the infrastructure for automation. The taxonomy is part of it, but that automation of, like, having, for example, our traction complete linking leads to accounts. You're not linking leads to accounts. You're not doing much of this in the first place, right? It's really hard to automate it at scale unless you have a very tiny database. So I'll kind of leave it there on that point. Scott?
Yeah, I think, like, to that point, buy-in. So as we had mentioned earlier, it's critical. You need to make sure that everyone agrees with this system, or at least can be proven using the current one versus the new one and showing them the difference between. Without that, it's harder to sell. Having evidence makes this an easier thing to push forward. And the other thing I had mentioned that was very important to us, because we don't necessarily have sales competing for pipeline, is factoring in the overlap. So looking at historical data and seeing how many times in the past teams contribute to the same deal, and setting aside a little bit of overages in the targets to account for teams contributing to the same deals. If you don't do that, it makes it a little bit more, like, problematic if everyone's exceeding but you're missing the company target. So you want to make sure that you look at the past, see what was done, see how much overlap took place, and implement that so that you have a buffer.
Nice. Yeah, this is amazing. Guys, I know we have about 2 minutes left. I don't know if we have any time for more questions, but thank you very much to both of you for walking us through this. I learned a ton. My top takeaways for really helping kind of avoid that conflict, that finger pointing between sales and marketing, was to move from a system where it's really black or white, it's one or the other, to a system where it's both, that we're measuring all of the contributions, because it really is a team effort, and trying to get as much data as we can. And one takeaway I had was that you can start to get this data first while you're getting buy-in from the executives, so that you can go back and report and see how much influence there was to set targets, etc. And then, of course, continue measuring what you used to. That was a big one that I learned from you guys just now, so that you can always compare later. And that it really doesn't take too many systems to do it, that you're using primarily your existing marketing automation, your CRM, and perhaps a couple other tools, but Google Sheets, it sounds like, to do a ton. So thank you guys. Anything I missed there? Any other last takeaways or advice or points that you'd want to call out?
Not on my end.
Nothing
Good
on
luck
my end.
to whoever wants to do this.
I would invite people to, and I think it'll be shared after, but feel free to add us on LinkedIn if you want to continue the conversation. Both Scott and myself, we're happy to chat about it. We're quite passionate about this topic. So
I totally agree. Yeah, if anyone wants to learn more, feel free to reach out to us. We'll get you in touch. We'll send some more practical advice. You can head on over to tractioncomplete.com or the Revenue Optimist, and we'll send that out and share it with you guys. But George and Scott, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who's listening.
thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us. Take care. Bye.
Bye, guys.